Welcome everybody to another session of Navigating a Crisis, Conversations of Change. And today I have with me the Clinical Director of NADA, which is the New South Wales AOD peak body, Dr. Suzie Hudson. But before we commence with our conversation, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are taking part in this interview, but also where you might be viewing it. Pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also particularly at this time look to our Indigenous peoples for some leadership through this space of uncertainty and turbulence. I think they have a lot to offer in this space. And just to give a little bit of context to this series, it's an opportunity for people across the AOD sector, obviously within Victoria and across Australia and other associated sectors, to share what they're doing to navigate through this period of I'll say the word unprecedented. I'm sure we've heard it all a lot, really. But, unprecedented uncertainty. There you go. Just a time that, we really is better for us to come together to share what we can, to learn from each other and to continue to create a sense of connection and humanity through all of this. So I'll let Suzie introduce herself. So if you want to give us a little bit of background, Suzie, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, Naomi. So as was said, I'm Suzie Hudson. I'm the Clinical Director, and what that means is that in my work at NADA, we represent around about 100 non-government drug and alcohol service providers, everything from residential outreach, counselling, day programs, detox, those sorts of things. My job is really to provide support and clinical input to our members, but also in relation to advocacy. I'm a social worker by trade, and I've worked in the drug and alcohol and forensic and mental health areas for about 20 years, and I still see clients now. So that's been an interesting shift for me too, and provide a lot of clinical supervision. So that's me in a nutshell.
Great. So I think, Liz, we were talking about just before we started this, that you have your finger on the pulse of a lot of things happening in New South Wales and the sector. So
yeah,
it'd be great to have your perspective on these questions.
Thanks.
So the first question was, and I have been asking this to a lot of service providers, and I'm saying, what are you currently doing for yourself, for your staff, the people that you serve, and also being a part of the peak body, I guess the sector in New South Wales, to manage the current situation safely, humanely, and with a sense of dignity for everybody involved?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And I think I'd like to sort of start with what we've been doing as an organisation for our members in particular. Yeah. What we saw was a real need to provide as much support for people in such a rapidly changing environment. What we noticed was their ability to adapt, the agile nature that they've always brought to this work, and their placing of clients of all kinds really at the centre of these shifts and changes. So what we have tried to do in relation to that is to really think about what they need to better support their clients and consumers. How do we help clients and consumers navigate these changes? So in the first instance, it was about trying to both provide most up-to-date information around COVID-19, around what things might be useful for service adaptation. And that was everything from what should people in residential facilities be doing in terms of intake, through to how should people who provide face-to-face counselling set up their space for it to be, private and confidential, and to uphold all those things that keep clients as safe as possible. So a lot of practical types of things. But the larger piece of work, and it's interesting that I follow this pattern, because what we see among drug and alcohol providers, so that is the clinicians and the workers, is they often put their own needs, their own wellbeing needs in particular second. They're really focused on their clients, which is right on, which is exactly how they need to be. But this has sort of come at a time when ever present, or ever more we know how important it is that our workers are really aware of their own wellbeing. And so we at NADA had started a large piece of work spearheaded by Suzie Hodge around worker wellbeing. And so you can find right now on our current website, you just have to write into your URL, wellbeing.nada.org.au, should I say? And right there are a whole range of resources we have felt are needed for the sector prior to this crisis, but even more so now. That really ask people to reflect on what we call the ABCs of worker wellbeing. So that is that awareness. So how am I doing? Where am I at? The balance. So the balance between the work and ourselves and the organisational needs and how clients are going, and connection. The C being the connection part.
That's great.
Yeah, so lots of really, I suppose, helping services to reorient. So letting their clients know what's going on, shifting and changing, but not breaking the continuation of the service provision, seeing that they are indeed a very integral part of the health and social system.
Yeah.
And then what is it that we can be helping our workers to do? That the wellbeing is really an interconnected range of needs that people have. So not just their emotional well-being, but everything around their environmental well-being, their physical well-being, their social well-being. And that's pretty key at the moment. So how can we shift some of those ways of supporting? So that's a huge sort of piece of work. And I suppose it's really sort of put to the fore how important that is, that people are actually checking in with themselves, checking in with each other. And doing it, you know, some of the tools that we sort of came to produce were really about how can we help facilitate people's checking in. So there are some really good little audits really of how you're going in all these different domains that give, and then from entering into that that audit of yourself, you're getting very clear targeted messages. Because sometimes we can do well in one space, like the physical space. I'm currently doing, you know, PE with Joe on the old.
I'm doing nothing, and it's been amazing.
In fact, I'm probably doing more exercise now than I ever did when I was able to go outside. So, you know, looking at, say, that, you know, I might be doing that bit well, but then maybe I'm not doing so well on more of the sort of psychological side, or you know, the social, you know, which parts. And so what are some very specific tips that people can be engaging with to boost those other areas? So they've been some of the tools that we've really focused on for the membership. And then in terms of our own staff, I've really ramped up the number of check-ins that I do. So we've been really doing that much more often, and making it a little bit light as well. Really giving the message also to staff. And I think this is something I've picked up in the universe, as you know, and on media, is that actually there's a lot of pressure on people to feel like they're not doing enough because they're at home and they're maybe doing homeschooling and every other thing under the sun. And so there's actually a new pressure to really prove or demonstrate that you're working hard. And that means, I think, unfortunately, that people don't necessarily switch off. So that brings us back to that B of the ABCs of balance, you know.
And particularly where, you know, a lot of people are working from home. So how do you switch off when your workspace is in your home? What are the and I love the idea of the audit. Like, I think that audit sounds fantastic.
It's a very practical, you know, Naomi, because we often think, oh yeah, I do a little bit of meditation and I do a bit of this, but sometimes we don't really pay enough attention to all of those interconnected parts of ourselves. And so doing something like that can be nice and structured. And
I think particularly when you're talking about balance, one thing that's been a concern, or it's they're concerned about the potential impact is when school goes back and children are at home and expected to be doing homeschooling, and parents are working, and all in the same space. That can become quite problematic. So I think that idea of I guess it cuts across a couple of things, that idea of balance in terms of what are your needs amidst all this, because as a worker and potentially as a parent, you're putting other needs before your own. So bringing that to the fore. But also this idea of, I can't read my writing. I just made some notes where you're talking about it. But this idea of reflection, when you're working with colleagues or you're working with peers, that, often they're some of the first people to notice if something is not quite right, or if you're affected or impacted in some way. So when you don't have that, you also
absolutely
more kind of signposting, you've got to rely on doing it yourself.
I think so. And I think, if we talk also, that extends to clients, that transition to doing video or telehealth or, phone counselling for some clients can be a real adjustment, well, both clients and the people providing the service. And so some of the tools and things is really thinking a lot about how we prepare ourselves as the worker, as well as the client, that we do some small things that really promote safety. So, if technical things, like if the connection is lost, how I know that you're safe. And so in terms of that goes the same for wellbeing, because as you're saying, if you're not passing by someone in the corridor, you can sort of notice that maybe they're not doing so great. You haven't seen them all day, and then you get the snippet, and then the connections are not so great. How do you pick up on that nuance of how people are going?
Yeah. And I think also you're right when you're talking about how to, this idea of people feeling that they need to demonstrate what they're doing and they need to work harder. But I think people also have this expectation that they need to be competent right away.
Exactly.
It's not just about, it's a paradigm shift in working in a digital space. It's not just about, that's okay, we'll have a conversation through a webcam instead of in person.
Exactly.
It's a different way of working. And, to, I guess, give yourself some time to develop and to get comfortable and to feel confident in that space as well, rather than thinking, oh yeah, oh good.
Yeah, how hard could it possibly be?
Yeah, but it actually is. It's not just about using different hardware. It's actually a different way of working. So
exactly. Yeah, and I think in my own clinical work, so in my own counselling work, it's taken a lot of preparation to help clients adjust and to think about the things that I can do to slow the pace down a little bit, to allow for a bit more, noticing things, to provide them with tools that they can be using throughout the session. And then as you're saying, for me, it's also about stepping straight from a counselling session into dinner time with your children. It's just, so actually I've had to really shift and change when and how those sessions happen, really ensuring privacy and confidentiality of what I'm discussing, but at the same time being able to say, okay, I'm going to take a moment in this space to decompress a bit before I then step into the next space. So actually for me, it's been a lot about the setting up of physical spaces.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and I think this idea of, it certainly keeps coming through a lot for me, that this time is exposing a lot of things, and it's exposing a lot of flaws in our systems and our relationships and our government, a whole range of different things, but it seems to just be exposing a lot. And I think that notion of self-care potentially is one of those, where now you actually have to make conscious and deliberate choices to do self-care, whereas previously maybe you could get away with not. Yeah,
it's a really good point, Naomi. I think, what I've noticed is actually the things that I thought would in some ways be so much more difficult or worse, as you suggest, people are having to pay a bit more deliberate attention to their own self-care and setting up of spaces and shutting off from work and paying attention to children and things like that. And then on the other hand, services have just been incredible in the way they have adapted and changed, but then interestingly, barriers that may have been there previously in working with other parts of the sector or other services
Are there any more? Miraculously.
Miraculously are working incredibly well. So I think there's also that real excitement's probably a bit of a strange word. Opportunities that have come out of
fun. Excitement's fun. I'm excited all the time. So.
Yeah, it really has been amazing. I mean, you have to step back from thinking, why didn't we do this earlier, in terms of some of those connections. But no, I think it's the new normal. I think there'll be service delivery changes and operational changes in particular that will remain changed for the better.
Yeah, great. I think we almost have kind of segued into the last question. So I might, sorry, I had things popping up on my screen. Talk about balance. There's all sorts of stuff happening on here at the moment.
I bet.
But I will bring you into question 2, which is, I guess this was in recognition that potentially in times of upheaval like we are in now, that one way of being able to move through that with more ease and certainly to be able to find a bit more meaning post the event is to have had some sense of agency through it.
Yes.
So this question is kind of directed towards that, in the sense of how can people support your organisation, or if they, if there's any idea around advocacy or volunteering or resources or, anything that can kind of be anything people can contribute to, I guess.
So for us, one of the key things has been the overwhelming and fantastic, and I mean, our sector in New South Wales, certainly our network works very well together usually, which is great news. But what we've really seen now is this real desire to share what changes people have made. And so great. what we would say is to keep that coming. We've really gone to our members who are the people who know best, and also most importantly consumers and clients, to say what do you need, how can we as a peak body sort of sitting in the middle bring together all the tools and resources and share those so that best practice is happening across and in an equitable way. Because certainly in New South Wales, there's been differences in terms of approach for different services. Some have had to reduce maybe some of their intake numbers. Some have had to make the decision to close the service temporarily. And that has a huge impact not only on clients and consumers, but it does on the whole, on the sector as a whole. And so what we would say in terms of things that are useful for us is that continuing of letting us know, keeping us up to date, what is it that we can do to support you? Are you having problems with food deliveries? We talk a lot about, and obviously, toilet paper and food and things like that, running off the shelves, and how individually that impacts households. But you can appreciate for, residential services, once those deliveries sort of slow down, or there's a slowdown in the supply, that's a critical issue,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Victorian sector has certainly been doing similar work in the sense of being really open to sharing resources, ideas, information, what's working, what's not, and even being able to support if there's any staff shortages or, people have an increase in referrals. How do they help kind of make that a bit more equitable as well? So
we've seen some real flexibility around, well, we can actually do this part really well, or where we already had set up online or telephone services. Can we share with you our knowledge around that on some good practice? So I mean, whilst that's always sort of been there, I'd say that what we would be saying to our members and everybody is, please keep documenting. I mean, I know it's another job to do, but really taking note of what changes you've made so that we can also learn in the long term about what things worked really well and what things were, not so great. I think that's also something we would say could be really helpful is where you can, on the back of a napkin, you know, pop a few notes down about what it was that was helpful, what did work well, what feedback did you get from clients, you know, asking clients what was helpful.
I agree, and I think there's some work being done in the homelessness space here as well, where they survey clients annually anyway, but this year when they survey clients, they'll be focusing on, you know, the sector response to this and getting a sense of, you know, what could have been done differently, what could have been done better, what worked really well, what didn't. So, you know, that not just from an individual, but from a sector, you know, perspective. I think it will be super interesting to see what comes from that. Yeah,
I think so. I think there's a real opportunity here, and I would really encourage anybody who's doing online or face-to-face counselling where they can to you know, obviously check in to see how that experience was for the person, but you know, really feedback to them how important it is that, you know, we learn from these processes and that going forward we can, you know, improve
and build on it. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay, and this brings us to our last question, which is always my favourite one.
Very good.
You know, I think I have to make this disclaimer at the outset, but obviously notwithstanding the harm, the very real harm that has been caused in this by this virus, by COVID-19. But I'm all about the positive reframe and able to see, you know, what the potential in any given situation is. So do you have a positive reframe for this, and in terms of what this current situation provides in terms of opportunities or possibility, and how that might bring about a better outcome, not just for our sector and the people that we work with, but the collective as well?
Yeah, my positive reframe will be most unsurprising to people who know me, but is really about it gives us a tiny window into how resilient our people are, and helps us acknowledge more the way in which our clients survive their everyday lives, and their senses of isolation and distance from society. And for this moment in time, I think some of us are really starting to appreciate what an impact that isolation can have on human beings, and what small things that we might do differently when this is all over and we're together again, in truly appreciating what impact that can have, and the power of human presence, human touch, and really connecting with others.
Oh, that's beautiful. I think that's a really lovely insight, and that idea that this is an opportunity to enhance compassion and enhance empathy and enhance understanding as a way of feeling closer and more connected, even whilst physically we are so distant. I think that's a really powerful metaphor, and I sincerely hope that is what happens as a result of this. So I'm backing your positive reframe 110%.
Well, that helps me get through the lonely nights, Naomi, or the days, the busy days of work, family, children, friends, you know, all those bits and pieces that really are the great supporters. They can overwhelm us, but actually they're exactly what we need. So it is really reaffirming that, keeping that awareness of ourselves, finding some balance, and really connecting in whatever ways we can.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's been such a pleasure.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Yeah, look, I'm really grateful that you're able to spend some time in sharing what's happening in New South Wales. I'd love to pop up that link to your Wellbeing.
Fantastic.
I believe I've written it down correctly, but I'll check it before I pop it up. And if there's any other information, you can let me know off this. If there's anything else you want me to post up on that, I'll do it as well, so that people can still access anything that you're New South Wales.
And can I do a little plug? VADA have been doing a little lunchtime meditation sessions And
Yeah, that's me.
they're amazing. So, you know, little things like that, go Vada.
Oh, thanks. Awesome. Yeah, appreciate it. I didn't know that was happening in advance, I'll say.
No, truly, it's great.
Yeah.
Really great. So thank you for the opportunity. Thanks a lot, Naomi.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Okay. Thanks.
See ya.
Ciao.